I do not think that I exaggerate when I say that concentration meditation or Samadhi, Jhana and all the different terms are the topics that attract the vast majority of modern practitioners' attention. Well, this is only natural, as this kind of meditation is perfectly in line with what the mind of one of the many desires in most cases. It is a default interest, as, well, we are interested in pleasure. Wisdom, or vipassana as it's sometimes called, meditation, is usually only mentioned as something you also do on the sides, while the majority of work is dedicated towards concentration. In the end, our behavior is in line with our values and desires, and we do exactly what we desire in the vast majority of cases, and in, well, most of the time, and that is aiming for or following what gives us pleasure. Today we try to understand what wisdom, on the other hand, truly is and what it is not. But first, I like to start with a few examples when it comes to this kind of jhana, when it comes to this kind of pleasure following. And there are various spiritual, or at least esoteric traditions in the Western world nowadays that gain some popularity that also focus on some degree of pleasure. And one of those examples would be the pleasure bunnies in yoga. I do not want to put down any specific tradition, by the way. I simply say that if you have the goal of liberation, permanent liberation from suffering, then many of those modern schools will not contribute to that. They might give you a release for some time, but they will not pull the root so that it can never regrow. And those pleasure bunnies do attain lots of pleasure during their exercises, during their flow states and whatnot. Same for the, well, let's call them orgasmic jhana schools that focus on very intense kinds of pleasures. And the same holds true for the schools of slight pleasure focus when it comes to jhana. There are teachers out there that emphasize and teach withdrawal from the domain of sensuality to some degree when it comes to the development of jhana. But then, as soon as some good feelings start popping up, they, instead of following the Buddha's instruction as in remaining your withdrawal, tell you to focus and zoom in on those pleasures. And that is also a wrong view. That is not in line with the suttas explain. And then there are the schools that focus on extreme kinds of pleasure. So there's a spectrum of pleasure focus when it comes to the various different kinds of jhanas that exist. And again, they cannot all be the same thing, as I say in many videos. 40 to 100 different kinds of instructions will very likely not lead to the same state that the Buddha described. And again, remember, in the suttas, the Buddha never gave us any kind of recipe, technique, or instruction apart from the withdrawal from sensuality when it comes to the cultivation of jhana. It's almost like those techniques are designed to be a bait to draw people with a natural interest and pleasure in. And this is not so good. The Buddha specifically said in the suttas that the Dhamma goes against the grain. It is not the many people who are interested in that, but the few. And this is something that we should keep in mind. There are, for example, people who are meditating 3 hours or more each day, and they very much take that as sustenance for their happiness. If something were to happen to their meditation time, they would no longer be able to maintain their happiness. It is a very conditional kind of practice and a very conditional kind of happiness. And that schedule of theirs has to be kept alive, has to be kept intact, and has to be protected. And imagine such a person would be followed by a gang of noisy children, or by someone with a musical instrument. But they keep their cool. And the answer to that is very likely no. As soon as there's samadhi, whatever it is, that doesn't have to be the samadhi that the Buddha called samadhi, or sama samadhi. As soon as the samadhi is interrupted, their cool fades with it, and they are no longer as calm and as composed as they thought they were, because the circumstances changed, the conditions changed, and as such, their peace is no longer there. But liberation goes beyond conditions. It means that whatever happens, your liberation stays intact. And jhana, in the suttas, while it is with sustenance, it is not with sensual action. It is not with sensual sustenance. The nutrition, or the nutrient for jhana, is precisely not following and not giving in to the temptations of the sensual domain. And this means that the entirety of the sensual domain has to be given up. And for example, the Buddha called in Majjhima Nikaya number 8 all the jhanas pleasant abidings here and now, and not in the future, which is very important. So wisdom is even one step on top of that. Wisdom is entirely without sustenance. And this is how deeply rooted and interrelated both of them are. Jhana is with sustenance, but you are pretty much liberated here and now. But wisdom makes sure that you are also liberated in the future and liberated from the past in all kinds of timelines, so to speak. And this is very important. And this is what most practices do not get right, the time horizon. There are temporary liberations of mind, no question about it. You can be liberated for the duration of a meditation setting. You can be liberated for a week. You can be liberated for months. You can be liberated for an entire lifetime, an entire human lifetime. You can be liberated for entire eons on end and still be fundamentally liable to suffering and will fall back because you have not understood the fundamental principle that the Buddha was teaching. All those kinds of liberation do exist. And from the point of view of the person who thinks that those 100 years that we have right now are all there is, all of them, or the vast majority of them, will seem like legit liberations of mind, simply because they do not consider those vast, extraordinary time horizons that the Buddha has explained in the suttas. The wisdom, overall, is not something separate from both sila, your conduct, and from mental non-sensuality, which would be your samadhi. It is the very same thing on a deeper level, on a much more subtle level that we have to keep in mind. So the former two, sila and samadhi, pretty much get rid of your suffering here and now. And samadhi makes sure, not samadhi, wisdom, panya, makes sure that the suffering and everything that comes with it and the wrong views and the bad conduct cannot come back. And there are lots of citations how panya and samadhi are not really something separate in the suttas. If you look very hard, you might find a sutta or two that talks separately about those two things. But in the absolute vast majority of the suttas, they are always mentioned as aspects of the very same thing. So samadhi and panya are almost used interchangeably. And the vast sutta access nowadays is surely something that was not available back in the days. You did not have your private Buddha or your private Ananda that was walking around with you, repeating all the discourses of the Buddha to you whenever you wished. So most people had to do without that distinction. They never learned about it. To them, samadhi and panya, when brought to fulfillment, so to speak, was more or less the same thing, or was very, very related. Most people never had any distinction at all. So why do modern practices, why do modern schools, modern teachings make such a distinction? To me, it is quite puzzling when I look back to the suttas. And we could, as an example, define based on the suttas what the term panya even means. And there are, for example, different kinds of wisdom. So what is, in your view, worldly wisdom? I mean, the term is very much available to us, and it's clearly not something that is related to intelligence. We usually consider old people as wise, people with lots of experience in life, that have lived through a lot, and the focus here should be on experience. They have lots of life experience, and that is usually correlated with the term wisdom, even though most people do not clearly define what wisdom even is. And there is this worldly kind of wisdom, and then there is the world transcending kind of wisdom. And you could say that jhana is wisdom with regards to sensuality. You have burned yourself on sensuality and now know that it's actually painful, as the Buddha, for example, said or explained in the simile of the leper, who has previously burning his wounds with glowing hot iron rods, and then he notices that without a painful condition, namely the addiction to sensuality, such burning is actually painful. It is not something that you have to do. It is only something that seems desirable when you are, in fact, afflicted, ill, diseased. Only then will it appear to be, well, desirable to burn yourself. And the same is true with sensuality. It will only appear pleasant when there is the underlying addiction, when we are lusting for sense experience. Without that lust, giving in to the triggers that Mara presents us with is actually kind of painful. And panya, in contrast to that, is samsaric wisdom. As in, panya goes even deeper. So you understand the entirety of samsara, not just the sensual part, as painful, as a dart, as an affliction, as suffering. You understand suffering in its entirety. And wisdom is more or less equivalent to understanding dependent origination and understanding anicca on the most fundamental level that it could be understood. And you can, to have a better understanding of all of it, think of the example of a drug addict who has been cured. The work of overcoming the addiction comes first, and only once the addict is no longer addicted can he realize his freedom from the drug, but only if he truly is free from it. And this realization at the end, this is what wisdom is. Now you understand, oh, this drug was truly oppressive. This drug was only something that I considered an escape because I was addicted. Sensuality, however, is the most fundamental addiction to all kinds of sensual experience. And wisdom goes even further and includes all kinds and all types of craving and control, and not just the sensual kinds. So it goes even deeper than that. And it makes the liberation permanent. It is what makes you incapable of ever going back to sensuality or any other kind of craving. And a drug addict, as an example, and it is the same for a sensuality addict, will experience some withdrawal symptoms once he stops giving in to his lustful and hateful impulses. He always has to do the work and the effort of, well, getting over the addiction first. And he cannot just do something else to get closer to non-doing, as an example. That would be foolish to assume. You cannot just replace one drug with another and then say that you are no longer addicted. Yeah, sure, you are no longer addicted to heroin if you have replaced it by cocaine or by smoking or by drinking, but you are still addicted. And replacement drugs only work within samsara, and they are not a legit strategy to escape the entirety of samsara. We, however, when we seriously are practicing the Dhamma, and not all of us are, which is perfectly fine, by the way, but those of us who are practicing for the full liberation from suffering, we want to escape the entirety of samsara forever. And the severity of that statement cannot be overstated. We want to be free from suffering for all eternity, so to speak. We do not want to fall back to the netherworld in, 60,000 aeons from now, even though that would be a kind of, long-lasting liberation. But, think back. Whatever you thought as a child whatever times you thought as a child would never come when you are 30 or something like that. In the blink of an eye, it all happened. And the same is true for eons upon eons of time on end. At some point, they're just over. You just blink and all those eons are gone. And then you are back to square one. You are back in a state of woe. You are back to suffering. This is not worth it. You do not want to keep spinning in this wheel of samsara forever. You want to escape it. And sensuality is basically the entirety of sensual experience. Or the lust for any kind of sensual experience. And that is pretty much what the vast majority of people know. They do not know anything else except for sensuality. And the Buddha said that multiple times. And this includes all the poison-driven interactions with the world of the senses. So whenever you act within the domain of the senses, manipulate sense experience to some extent to get something out of it, then you are following sensual impulses. And you are cultivating sensuality and not non-sensuality. You are not cultivating renunciation. And panya is the nail in the coffin for craving. This is what it is. It makes sure that craving stays away and shows you that it technically should have been impossible to begin with, but we do not start in such a state. We start with avidya. There's no first point to be discerned where we have been without avidya. For it to stay away, it has to be away, at least for a time, sufficiently first. And only then can you realize that this is a way leading to the eradication, to the end, to the pulling of the roots of suffering. So the fourth noble truth has to be included in that, the path of cultivation towards that understanding. And sila, samadhi, and panya are all part of the very same thing. They are gradual refinements of the identical training. But only panya is special to the Buddhas. All the different religious traditions out there have some degree of teaching on virtue, of refinement and purification of conduct. There's no question about it. All the religious traditions, at least the good ones, I would say, have some kind of teaching on the purification of mind, of the mental behaviors. Again, there is no question about it. The question is just how deep all of that goes, how long-lasting the kinds of liberation are that you can achieve via this or that kind of training. and the teachings of dependent origination that the Buddha taught, the impermanence, all of that truly breaks the chain of dependent origination. It does not only bury it very deeply underground, it truly breaks it so that it cannot come back. And this is one thing that sets Buddhism apart from all the other traditions. And here is a citation from Samyutta Nikaya number 22.3. And how is one a migrant with no shelter? The realized one has given up any desire, greed, relishing and craving for the form element, any attraction, grasping, mental fixation, insistence, and underlying tendencies. He has cut it off at the root, made it like a palm stump, obliterated it, so that it is unable to arise in the future. That's why the realist one is called a migrant with no shelter. And this is so important and so often overread. It is unable to arise in the future. And this is what basically the entirety of the Buddha's teaching is all about. How to ensure that craving cannot come back. Surely we can have instances of time where we are without craving, but ensuring that it stays back forever and then being absolutely certain about it, that is a completely different beast. And it is virtually indistinguishable by people who hold the view that 100 years are all we have, or that, I don't know, an eon of time, or that we want to be reborn in heaven and it will last forever. Sure, from your point of view right now, it will last forever because an eon is an unfathomable long time. But it will end. This is one of the observations by the Buddha when he surveyed the billions of lives that he was going through when he was sitting in meditation. But anyway, this should be enough for today. Let us now come to the most important part. First, many practitioners hold the view that Sila, Samadhi, and Panya are separate practices. First you do your Sila, then you do your Samadhi, and at some point you are doing your Panya. You are doing your Vipassana meditation. But that's not how it is portrayed in the suttas. In the suttas, all three are applications of the very same principle on finer levels. All three practices are virtually identical. They are virtually the same. They are concerning themselves with the purification of your views, with the purification of your conduct on the bodily, verbal, and mental level. You want to understand what wholesome and unwholesome even are. All of those are practices that are circling around your intentionality. You want to understand your intentionality. But for that, you first have to understand restrain your physical behavior. And it is a bit like cleaning a piece of cloth with a big or a medium size and with lots of small stains. You will not even see the small stains, your mental misbehavior, when it's full of very big muddy stains or something like that. So when your bodily and verbal behavior is not purified, you cannot even see the small stains. But once something has been cleaned, all the small impurities will become visible and you can start working with them. And in the end, Sila, Samadhi, and Panya are different aspects of the very same practice. There are no preparation exercises you do first. There is no Samadhi that is like sharpening an axe or something like that. No such foundation for any of those statements as the suttas. It is all the same. Those are all applications of the very same principle, of the very same practice that you do on ever finer levels, as for example explained in the simile of purifying gold in the suttas. But anyway, this should be enough for today. Thank you very much for listening. If you enjoy what we do here, feel free to like, subscribe to the YouTube things. And if you are interested in discussions with like-minded practitioners, feel free to join the Dhamma Discord server. But until then, I wish you a pleasant day and goodbye.